Joined now by Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Good to see you this morning, Richard. And what do you make of the first UK-EU summit? What are you expecting to hear today?
Well, I'm expecting a pretty much full-on surrender, frankly, on the three big critical issues. Looks like they're going to surrender on reintroducing freedom of movement, that they rebadge youth mobility. That all sounds very nice and cuddly. But in reality, if it's 18 to 30 or 35-year-olds, that was the bulk of the freedom of movement that the British people voted against in 2016, and then just a few weeks ago expressed a clear view against mass immigration by voting in huge numbers for Reform UK. Last week, the Prime Minister said he heard and he was going to reduce immigration. Not if you surrender to more freedom of movement. The second big surrender is on becoming a rule taker under what they call dynamic alignment, that we would have to accept all of the EU regulations. We don't want that. We actually want to reduce the regulations. We want to be able to reduce the cost of business, to reduce the cost of living. That would be complete foolishness. And then the third surrender is on the very important issue to my constituents in Boston and Skegness of fishing. We want to get back proper control of our fishing waters. The Tories did a pretty average deal a few years ago, but it seems that Keir Starmer is just happy to sacrifice that on the altar of trying to cozy up to the bungling bureaucrats in Brussels.
What is his intention? If that's the consequences, if that's what you're going to see, the three big problems, is that what he's setting out for? Is he determined to do those things, or are they just consequential?
Well, I mean, they're very important to the British people in all those respects. But this is a Prime Minister, of course, who basically wants to get us back into the EU through the back door. That's what this is all about. Cozying up, chummy, freedom of movement, taking their rules and regulations. I mean, let's just remember, to all of those who say, what's wrong with their rules and regulations? I'll tell you what's wrong. Germany's in recession. Most of the EU is in recession or flatlining. We're struggling, but we're doing a bit better. Why would you want to handcuff yourself and tie yourself closer to a failing economic model that's making people poorer? We need to break away from the shackles of the EU. We need to make sure that Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom and not tied into EU rules and regulations. We need to break away from net stupid zero, all their daft carbon taxes and levies, all of this stuff, to give ourselves the opportunity to grow again.
But then,
properly,
Richard,
significantly.
I'd have to ask you, Richard, why does he then not want to do those things? If those things make sort of common sense, is this because he's got another political agenda?
Well, I don't think that there's much common sense within the Prime Minister. His political agenda, as a lawyer who loves the international stage, is to cozy up to the EU. He wanted a second referendum, of course. He wanted more immigration, freedom of movement. He loves all this stuff. He doesn't understand why people in the industrial heartlands of the United Kingdom, just a couple of weeks ago, gave a massive boot in the backside to the Labour Party and voted for reform in huge numbers, including in the 16th safest Labour parliamentary seat. So look, he's clearly not listening and learning. He's clearly waffling when he says he wants to reduce immigration. And I think the British people need to be very, very concerned about this surrender.
But the government will say they got this majority in the general election last summer. In their manifesto, they clearly said they wanted closer ties to the EU. They'll say they have a mandate for this, and they've expressed that they won't turn back on the customs union, the single market, or freedom of movement of people around the bloc. I mean, they've expressed that.
They got less votes than Jeremy Corbyn, so I don't think they really have got a loveless landslide. But the latest mandate was just a couple of weeks ago, and the British people voted against this government in huge numbers, and yet it seems that the Prime Minister is basically just ignoring that, carrying on, putting his fingers in his ears. He's desperate to cozy up to this failing economic model, these failing EU regulators. And look, I mean, we'll be the beneficiaries in electoral terms, but in the interim, I'm very sad for the country, because this will be bad for citizens. It'll be bad for the constituents in Boston and Skegness and elsewhere.
Shorter queues at airports for people with British passports. I mean, easing trade with the biggest trading partner, the EU, a defence pact. I mean, those could all be good wins, couldn't they?
Look, we hear about this defence pact. Our defence is provided by NATO. We don't want anything to do with any form of EU defence mechanism or army. And this idea that we're going to be allowed access to EU defence contracts is for the birds. We hardly had any of that when we were a member of the European Union. And as for passports, each individual EU nation can voluntarily at the moment open access to the e-gates for British citizens. Most of them choose not to. Some countries, I think like Portugal, for example, actually do allow this. And isn't it nice? We take the moral high ground. We allow EU citizens to access our e-gates. And what have the EU bureaucrats in Brussels done? They've just cock-a-snoop at us. They've just ignored us. That shows who they really are. We can be friendly with our glorious partners and friends in EU nations, but frankly, we need to be very wary of the bureaucrats in Brussels.
And finally and briefly, Richard, why isn't the government more open with us? I mean, I think that if you explain to the populace and say, look, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're hoping to do, people are more likely to maybe think, OK, we'll give you a chance on that. We'll see where you're heading with this. Why do you think it's all so secretive?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Because they've got something to hide. They don't want to admit the truth. But I think never underestimate the gut instinct and the common sense of the British voter who sent a message to the government just a couple of weeks ago, don't sell us out, Prime Minister. And yet what's he doing? He's selling us out on freedom of movement. And, we just haven't got the border controls, the visa mechanisms to be properly monitored and supervised by our useless Home Office. And we will see huge abuse, and we will see the suppression of British wages and more pressure on British housing, British healthcare, and that's not good. In fact, it's very bad.
Thank you very much for your time, Richard Tice. Appreciate it. We'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that major summit between the UK and the EU is due to take place today after reports of last-minute crunch talks over a new deal running through the night.
We're live in the heart of the action as European leaders begin to arrive is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, good morning.
Morning, Eamon. Morning, Ellie. I think your last question there, Eamon, nailed it. So far, there's been very little attempt by the government to explain what is going on. We have to rely on reports, nudges here, winks there on this Brexit reset. And Ellie's right, of course, that this Labour government did win a landslide majority, saying it would get closer to the European Union. That's what voters vote for. And in fact, that's what polls suggest, that many people want a more pragmatic, possibly, if that's the right word. We're told that they're using ruthless pragmatism in these talks with the European Union, but certainly ways to make it easier, less difficult, maybe to travel on holiday between the European Union and the UK through its passport e-gates. But the big politics later will be, are we signing up to rules that we can't affect? Are we rule takers, not rule makers? And that's where there'll be big concerns, I think, from the Brexiteers, Reform UK and the Tories. But if we break it down into what might happen today, there's the Brexit triple lock the government's imposed on its talks. No return to the single market, customs union, or allowing freedom of movement. Now, we're told at GB News that last night there was a late breakthrough. There are still more steps to take. An update will be given to us mid-morning here in central London. There are different baskets of agreements they're looking to do. There's a possible UK signing up to a new defence and security pact. That's 150 billion euros of defence contracts. The French want to limit it to our access to 15%. We want to go more than that. That's defence jobs, the government will say later on. A new emissions trading scheme, as I say, and those passport e-gates that Richard Tice was being a bit sniffy about, but some who go on holiday may welcome the lack of queuing when we try and get through borders. The second basket is where there could be a deal done. We're not sure yet. That's on dropping checks on food and other it's called phytosanitary products going backwards and forwards between the European Union and the UK. And that's where you get into the question of rule takers legislators, not rule makers, because the European Court of Justice could have oversight of that. And that's where you get towards that word sovereignty, of course, in Brexit. And just finally, there might be some idea on freedom of movement for under 18 to 30-year-olds, and of course fish, access to fishing waters. We want to limit that to 5 years, whereas the EU wants a lot more than that. So all to play for. Brexit's back on the agenda. We'll bring it to you on the channel.
Thanks, Christopher. And on that subject of fish, let's go fishing now with our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, this morning, as we talk about that. Because, Dougie, this is the bit that's really concerning people today, and it's concerning us here in the studio as to who's speaking up on behalf of the fishermen and in what danger are they?
Well, welcome to Kilkeel. This is Northern Ireland's biggest fishing port. It's the most southeastern town in Northern Ireland. It's right at the very foot of the Mournes. And this harbour here used to be full to the brim of fishing boats. It was a massive industry. I remember coming through here as a child, used to get potted herrings and stuff on a Sunday night. It was a real treat. But of course, over the 80s and 90s, the cod in the Irish Sea, the fishermen were being accused of fishing it out, and loads of those vessels had quotas put on them. Many of them were decommissioned, and basically the Northern Irish fleet has just completely disappeared. What you now see coming out of Kilkeel is prawn fishery boats, shell boats. There is very, very few whitefish trawlers left in Northern Ireland. And of course, it's now been proved that they didn't fish it out. The cod had moved further north, and amazingly, we are now seeing tuna appearing in the Irish Sea. So that means that the sea is warming up. And the industry here in the village here, about 6,000 people, have really, really suffered because of quotas put upon them. Now today, if this deal goes ahead where it will allow Spanish, French, Irish vessels into that water, well, of course, those quotas will be split amongst them. And we remember in the last talks, Boris Johnson let grandfather rights go to some of those French vessels to come in as close as to 6 miles off English shores. Now the French are wanting that actually spread out even more, to do away with those grandfather rights and throw the fishing clean open again, which will cause real problems for British fishermen. And this is all down the Department of Agriculture. But be aware, we have put up with protocols in Northern Ireland for a long time since Brexit, and Britain may now have to face the same thing on trade deals going back and forward.
Very interesting, very, very interesting. A very deserted looking Kilkeel harbour there on this Monday morning. Douglas, thank you very much.
Yeah, and Dougie makes a good point there. It's not just the fishermen, it is the 6,000 people living in that village. I mean, it's whole communities we're talking about, aren't we?
Totally, whole communities.
That rely on that industry.
And the industries that live off those people earning the money that they earn. And this is replicated all around the coastline of the UK. No matter where you live, and it's just awful. I mean, who cares? Who is fighting for these fishermen? These politicians say they care about fishermen, they care about farmers. Do they really?
Malcolm makes a point. Why is the EU so dead set on accessing our waters? It's a good question.
Money.